Humanitarian pause when you're dealing with a group that cuts the heads off of children. I mean, you're a military expert, I'm not, but a humanitarian pause with Hamas, I don't get the naivete of thinking that that could happen.
We have to be careful to distinguish between a humanitarian pause and a ceasefire, which both Netanyahu and President Biden have been adamant that there's not going to be one, because that implies that the two sides are going to cease fire while they try to negotiate or something. There's no negotiating with Hamas, and nobody's even thinking there is. But there are literally millions of innocent civilians caught in the crossfire that desperately need that humanitarian pause, both to escape some of the fighting and to get the humanitarian supplies to continue living. Two hospitals have already shut down, and those numbers of deaths are going to continue to rise. And that's a problem for Israel as well as the United States, because we can't be seen as going after the just target of Hamas in such a way that causes unacceptable civilian casualties that can be avoided. And that's the real problem, because it undercuts even Western support, and it increases the anger of the Arab population that might go against Israel later, especially in Hezbollah.
You raise a good point, and one that I think Benjamin Netanyahu also understands. I'm going to play a clip from him and then ask you a question on the other side.
Those who protest for Hamas, you're protesting for sheer evil. There are a lot of misguided people out there who don't know the facts. You're talking to people who deliberately targeted civilians, who raped and murdered women, who beheaded men, who burnt babies alive, who kidnapped little babies and Holocaust survivors, you name it. These are the people that you're supporting.
There seems to be a little bit of a shift in U.S. rhetoric. Publicly, it's slight but discernible. What do you think the U.S. is telling Israel privately? I mean, you mentioned hospitals, you mentioned safe passage for innocent Palestinians. What do you think the Biden administration is telling Netanyahu privately?
From what we read, they're definitely telling them privately, and now even some publicly. Yesterday, Secretary of State Blinken actually pretty emphatically said, hey, we've got to start, meaning that Israel has to start doing things differently, because in their view, there are too many civilians being killed. And like I say, the problem with that is that it could undercut support. Now, what Netanyahu's mentioning there, I think, is a little bit of a mischaracterization and not in his favor. Because there's many people, like here in Washington, D.C., I talked to some people who were in that protest, and they absolutely say they are not protesting for Hamas, but for the Palestinian people. And there are some for Hamas, but we can't say that all those are, because what that does is it undercuts our own view that these people are protesting for something that matters to American security, really, which is that they maintain support for Israel. And so the people do care about these innocent people. When you see these hospital images where people are just literally dying in the hospital for lack of water and food and electricity, that gets to Americans' heartstrings, and we rightly want to protect those people, I think.
It is said that Alexander the Great, when he went to Afghanistan, had to kind of change his tactics. He became more cruel, less humane. How does a country, Israel, the United States, that wants to be humane, prosecute a war when you are dealing with groups like Hamas that literally kill pregnant women and cut the heads off of children? How do you balance that?
That is the right question to ask, and we have to have the right answer. If we're going to be different than all these other regimes out there, if we're going to be different than those who don't care about civilians, then we have to execute things differently. And I personally saw that many times in Afghanistan and Iraq, both, where we took a lot of care to take care of civilians, and it made the military process go slower, but we were able to do it and did keep those casualties low. Because if we don't, then we have no moral authority to be telling Russia, for example, not to put Ukrainian civilians in harm's way, or any of these other regimes that we don't like. If they're doing things that harm innocent civilians, we have no moral authority to tell them not if we're going to do it. So we have to do the harder work of taking care of these civilians while absolutely going after Hamas, because they all deserve to be killed for what they did to those civilians.